Oh, the Petrov. You know why they call it the Russian game, right? It's because the Petrov is the perfect opening for using the famed Soviet grandmaster strategy of win with white and draw with black. Well, with the Petrov, yeah, it's always going to be a draw with black. I mean, if you wanted to win, if you're like a real man, you would play openings like the Sicilian Knight off and the King's Indian. Like, what is this Petrov rubbish? I mean, who is your coach? I'm not going to say who your coach will be because I don't want to get sued by the government for rubbishing their coaches and their opening choices. Illingworth Chess, GM Max's lessons to improve your chess. What's up guys, it's GM Max here, and this video is all about how to play e4, e5. Today's game is one from very recent one, Nixic 2021 between Isik Khan against Farp Sanal, the Grandmaster from Turkey playing as black. Let's see how the game played out. It was e4, e5, and after knight f3, well I already have done some videos on how to play knight c6 with black. So this time, I'm going to show you how to play the Petrov with knight f6. And contrary to what I said in introduction, it's actually an opening that can be used very much to play for a win. Not only at the club level and the online level, but even Fabiano Caruana is one expert who's won a lot of very instructive games with it. What if they try to avoid the Petrov? Well, if they play the move f4, for that subscriber of mine who asked me for 30-second answer to the King's Indian, here you go. 30-second King's Indian is e takes f4, knight f3, and now to move knight to e7 is a fun little shortcut where you can meet d4 with d5 and kind of hit back in the center where either you take on d5 with a knight and defend the pawn that way, or you put the knight on g6 later, like knight c3, take, and knight to g6, or even knight d5 is still pretty good to be honest. And yeah, we got a little weakness on e3 we can go after. Or if they play bishop c4, then yeah, just like knight c6 and playing for d5 later tends to work pretty well for black in general. So yeah, basically King's Gambit's not too much to worry about. Stuff like center game you just take, and if they play c3, then one lazy response is just to play d5. There are other moves like accepting the gambit if you want to try and punish them, but otherwise stuff like just takes and giving back the pawn, and then just piling the pressure with moves like bishop to b4, knight c3, knight f6, and just knight c6, bishop g4 castles. That's a way to deal with the Daniel Negreanu Danish gambit. It's not funny actually because Negreanu's like my favorite poker players, so kind of cool to see him playing chess. But yeah, this opening not so scary if you know what you're doing. It's just more of a bluff, you could say. In any case, what if they play a move like bishop c4, bishop's opening? This is sort of considered to be a little bit of an anti-Petrov. You've got to be a little bit careful when faces, because knight c6 and knight f3 would kind of move audio out of your Petrov. But you have a good extra option where we can play, t-ball with the bishop. We can go c6, go d5 and whack, that's a home run right there. And that gives black a very healthy position, like knight f3, d5, bishop b3. And now the move bishop d6 is kind of the most obvious, but if you want to try and melt the move order for the maximum value, you can play moves like a5 and threaten to win the bishop. And sort of play moves like bishop b4 and kind of provoke some weakening moves like c3. And only then bring the bishop back to d6. It's kind of an advanced subtlety, but you're trying to avoid knight c3. So that your pawn on d5 doesn't come under so much pressure, and so you can play like bishop e6, knight d7 castle, and just have a very solid position from there. In any case, let's now see how the Petrov plays out for real. Knight f3, knight f6. Yeah, most people are going to go knight takes e5 against you and just grab the pawn. Of course, it's not like winning a pawn, but I mean, it is taking a pawn. If they play knight to c3, I think knight c6 is probably the most reliable counter. I mean, the four knights is a pretty broad territory. Obviously, white has all of d4 and bishop b5 are the main moves. But you also see moves like g3 and even moves like a3 occasionally, or bishop e2. So there are a lot of moves white can try, but it's probably better to cover it in a different video than this one, because the four knights kind of deserves getting to its own separate video. But if you do want some alternative I have mentioned before, in my 60-second Petrov video, that bishop b4, and just playing it like a Royal Petrov with cards reversed, it's not objectively as good, but it's still pretty solid and saves you having to learn all this other four knights theory. Now, one move that is a bit tricky that I see can trip up a lot of players, you're probably not going to face it all that often to be fair, but the move d4, the central attack, is one that can be a little bit dicey if you're not careful, because allowing ed4, e5 can give white a pretty nice central initiative. So instead you want to play knight takes e4, and if d takes e5, you have moves like bishop c5 if you want to roll the dice a bit and pile the pressure on f2. Otherwise, the solid approach is just to play d5, like bishop f3, d3, d5, knight takes e5, and knight d7, you can simply trade off the knight. You know, bishop d6 is also fine, by the way. But I mean, after, you know, just take, bishop to d6, castle. There are different moves that white can play to try to attack the white position, the black position. You know, moves like c4, knight c3, rook e1. But I find in most cases, as long as you just castle and, you know, sometimes sack a pawn at the right moment to get your counterplay going, that's usually going to give you a pretty fine position as black. So I wouldn't be too worried personally. But there is some theory that, you know, advanced players will want to go a little bit deeper on, most likely. In any case, the move knight takes c5 is, well, the main one. And now it's kind of important not to play knight takes e4, because then after queen e2, there are going to be some tactical problems along that open e-file. You know, I guess you guys know copycat chess, like when you're doing copycat. The problem is that when they play a check, you can't copycat the check so easily. So it turns out, well, you get your hand caught in the cookie jar after knight f6, knight c6, that would be winning the queen. And, you know, that's kind of the reason why knight e4 is not a good move, and why instead it's very important. You make sure to write this down, like tattoo it on your arm if you need to play the move d6 here. And you're going to actually tattoo on your wrist, kind of look during the game, like they're not going to notice like that you have the key move on there. Okay, I'm obviously joking, but yeah, after d6, they usually go knight f3. You know, moves like Cochrane Gambit, knight f7 are pretty much rubbish as long as you go for a quick d5 or c5 and just develop the king side quickly. White's basically technically close to lost here, so I'm not going to waste time on this rubbish sacks. After d6, knight f3, knight takes e4. Well, yeah, I mean, at this point, well, it's tried a lot of different moves. I already covered some of them briefly in my 60-second Petroff video, but I'm going to focus on kind of two main moves. Well, we'll plan just quickly, queen e2, queen e7 does break the pin and doesn't lead anywhere. The game saw white play d4 here, just grabbing the space in the center, and trying to make the argument that compared to a normal exchange French, that with black having made the extra move knight e4, that extra move actually could arguably be a disadvantage, because that knight then can come under a lot of pressure from the white pieces, and that's how white's going to try and get his initiative. But what if white plays a move like knight c3, the Nimzovich attack? In that case, I think that after takes bishop e7, you kind of have two options you can choose between after bishop e3. You know, white's general plan is just to castle long and try to attack your king in the future. So if you don't really mind these very sharp opposite castling positions, you're probably going to like the move castles. Then after queen e2, there will be games by players like Caruana, Kramnik, other top players where they go knight d7. And after castle, they just play moves like c6. And, you know, here at c6 is kind of go for moves like queen a5, and also to hit the pawn, and also moves like d5, knight f6, rook e8, just building a very solid center. There is a lot of theory to these positions, so it's definitely important to make sure you're well prepared for it. You know, one key idea that comes up a lot is to play knight c5 and trade off the bishop before they can get any sort of attack on h7. That can be one good idea to neutralize the white attack at a good time. But yeah, in general, if you're just a little bit too sharp for your taste, the solid alternative is to play knight c6, go bishop to e6, and you know, after castles, and let's say queen d7. I mean, basically this a line where white is slightly better, but it's very hard for white to kind of break black's position. You have moves off like a6 or h6 to stop any annoying bishop b5 pins after you castle long, or to stop any annoying knight g5 moves to go after your bishop pair. Your bishop will kind of be very solid on f6, and kind of the argument is just you have no real weaknesses, and white doesn't have a great pawn break to break down your position. So if you're playing maybe a high-rate player, or you're in a situation where you're just happy to draw the game, then probably this castling long approach is what you'll prefer. Whereas you prefer something a bit more fighting with more sharp play, then castles kingside to your move. In any case, the game saw the move d4, black played d5 to keep that knight solid, and after bishop d3 there is a crossroads where there are a lot of different moves and subs that black can play, but they sort of fall into two main categories. The first category aligns with bishop to e7, where in the old days they usually played it like with knight to c6, and you know, there was a lot of theory in these lines. In correspondence, more has been worked out to a draw, but in practical play, white can go knight d2 and sort of make the argument that after takes and takes it, you know, white's got a slightly improved exchange French because of having a bit of a lead in development. Objectively doesn't really come to much after bishop g4 and castles, but yeah, this is a line that I think white can sort of play for a win without too much risk, so it's not the most fun line in the world to play for the average player. I find that instead the lines with bishop d6 are a lot more spicy, they give you more dynamic play. And that's probably the reason why a lot of the modern Petroff repertoire books do recommend this approach for black. Because if white doesn't play c4, black kind of just goes bishop f5, knight c6, and so it gets an improved version of some of the other lines we saw, you know, with the knight being very well stationed on this e4 square. If you want to undermine knight, you really need to play c4 here as white. But the good news is we can play c6 and we just build this very solid pawn chain, making sure that the light squares are kept under black's control. And yeah, this is a crossroads where a lot of different moves can be played for white. There's a lot of fury, and obviously there's not time to cover every single move. In the game, I played queen c2, which is kind of the old main line. If white does play knight c3, just to trade off a lot of pieces, well, it can start just release all the tension, takes, and the old main line is to go bishop g4 and pin the knight, but now the modern trend is to go bishop f5, has been popularized by players like Fabiano Caruana. If bishop g5, just put the queen on a5, and there's a lot of things that white can try, but in general, black's pretty healthy. You can put the knight toward b6 to hit the bishop. Your rook's going to kind of sit on a square like e8. Often you'll kick the bishop with h6. Or if they do play some move like knight h4 to go after the bishop, you've got bishop e6. You can kind of trade off the bishops in this way. White's got a tiny edge, but nothing objectively special in that case. And if white does play a move like rook e1, then yeah, you just defend the bishop with the knight rather with bishop f5. And if they go queen b3, you kind of have a couple of good options as black. There's some extremely sharp lines where black goes knight a6 and sacrifices material. But the more solid approach is to go queen d7 and just to defend b7. A key point, of course, is that you're not worried about c takes d5 because, well, if they play queen d5, obviously you are running into un petit combinaison a la Capablanca with bishop takes h2 and, you have a little discovered check against the king, or you have a discovered attack against the queen, and that would indeed win the queen. So, therefore, white shouldn't take twice on d5, but otherwise you're sort of able to keep this square covered. Like in many cases, you can even play like d takes c4 and knight f6 if you really want to release the tension. Obviously, knight c3, there's some sharp fury here with knight c3, where there's a sort of funny line where white can sort of where black's kind of sacrificing material with queen takes b7, and then there's like this long engine line where you play like knight e4, and you basically sacrifice the exchange, but in return you kind of trap their queen on a8, and they sort of have to give the material back in order to avoid the queen getting trapped with knight c6 and so forth. So they kind of have to go rook e4 to sort of get as much material as they can. And then after knight 6, yeah, you get this sort of long theoretical line that normally I don't go deep with the theory, but the Petroff is one of these openings where you kind of have to know some specific long variations to play at a very high level. But we can kind of see that even though on material, white's got a quite serious material advantage with two rooks and a pawn for the queen, it turns out that black actually gets enough counterplay where you're able to charge the kingside pawns and actually get a very decent attack against the white king before white can consolidate and complete its development. So it's kind of one of these weird engine lines where at first it looks like white's just much better, but actually turns out that black is just fine. Like I said, there is also a knight a6 line, which is also a good alternative if you want to explore that. Again, you sacrifice material, but you get some interesting attacking chances in some lines. In any case, the game saw queen to c2. And after queen c2, knight a6 is kind of the thematic idea. Like, the point of this this opening is that, you're not really worried about them taking on e4. Because even though they win a pawn, you get very nice play for the pawn. You get a nice lead in development. You get the bishop pair advantage. And then queen kind of just gets kicked all over the place. Like, after queen d3, you can go knight b4. And after the queen moves, you've got bishop f5. And you've got threats like knight c2 to pick up the exchange. So you're getting a very strong initiative, and it's pretty clear, that only black, I think, can be better after, say, knight a3, a5. And, white's piece just kind of looks stupid on the queen side, quite frankly. But if you want to look smart, then do make sure to smash that like button. It does help me to make more YouTube videos like this one for you guys, and comment below with what you think about the Petroff defense. Is it a drawing weapon, or is it perfect for playing for the win at the club level, or the online level for that matter? Well, white played a move a3 to stop knight b4, which is the correct move here. And now I don't agree with the move that black played. He played this move knight f6, which even though it won him the game, I think that objectively it was a mistake. And I think that instead what Arsenal should have played is the move bishop g4. Again, saying that, we're not afraid of the pawn grab, because we're going to get a very nice initiative with our nicely in development. If you guys know of the Marshall Gambit, well, if you know of the Marshall Gambit in the Roy Lopez, well, it's kind of get compensation very similar to that opening with the bishop pair, the lead in development, and the active piece play. So normally I go knight e5, like, there's a lot of sharp fury from these positions, but the current consensus is that by playing the move bishop to f5 and kind of just keeping the tension, that black more or less ends up doing fine. There is a lot of sharp fury though, so there is quite a bit to know. Like, one point, for example, is at f3. The average person will probably say f3 is just winning a piece, right, Max? But there are actually some tactics here that you can actually play bishop e5. And then after they capture, you go queen b6 check, using the weakness. And the whole point of the play is that after king h1, that you've got this very nice tactic of knight f2. Like, without knight f2, you would simply be losing the knight indeed. But now you can play bishop takes d3, and you fork the rook and the pawn, and you basically win material and win the game here. So, yeah, that's the reason why this tactically works, and I could go a lot deeper into this, but I think this is a kind of good overview of saying this is why we play this move and why we can play bishop f5 and are not forced into the old main line of bishop e5, knight c5, which also has a lot of sharp trade that we don't really have the time to delve into deeply here. The problem with knight f6 is that, well, A, you've kind of wasted quite a bit of time moving your knight back and forth. Like, it's sort of really kind of an admission of failure of black's strategy. So you're just kind of giving away a lot of extra tempi for free for no really good reason. c5 was a really good move for white. I find that with this c5 pushed it's a kind of move that if black's got the knight on e4 to pawn f5, or just has knight well supported, you often don't want to play this move, because by closing it, you'll give black a very strong kingside attack. But obviously that's not really the case here. And I think that if white had played bishop a6 and then knight c3, well, I think white would have probably won this game. Because black's pawn structure is pretty disgusting. Knight e5 and later a move like queen a4 can pile the pressure on the pawns. And black has no active counterplay whatsoever. Like, the bishop is just dead wood on c8. But after knight e5, it sort of gave black some time to try to start correcting some of his mistakes. So he got the knight off the edge of the board with knight to c7. And now I think white's next move was not a very good decision. It was a bit too committal by white. I think that instead Khan should have played the move of knight to c3. And if they go knight e6 trying to pressure this backward pawn on d4, then yeah, just knight e2. I mean, black doesn't have any counterplay here still. White can simply go b4 and just expand on the queen side, creating some weaknesses in black's structure. And even ideas like potentially going f4 and just grabbing space on this side is very good. The problem when you don't have space, you're going to have a suffocating, like sort of an asthmatic, like Wee's like, until they eventually can't breathe and die. Okay, I shouldn't make light of these things, but I'm an asthmatic, so I guess I can make fun of myself, right? Anyway, the game went f4. And the problem with f4 immediately is that now, well, Sanal was able to correct his mistake. What do you think was the move to play to punish white for the move f4? If you need a grandmaster hint, what is the square that was weakened by the move f4 played here as white? Okay, congratulations if you came up with the move knight e4. So what's so great about knight e4? Well, the game will kind of show very clearly what's great about it, but one point I want to share is that if white doesn't take on e4, well, black can sort of play moves like f6 and f5 and just kind of tie up the board, with this sort of structure. Like, let's say, for example, a move like bishop to e3 is maybe a better example of knight c3. Now you can kind of see here that the board's kind of tied up. It's not that easy for white to just have a free hand on the queen side, because we're kind of covering it with our pieces. And you never know when black might even play a move like g5 and try to create some counterplay on the king side. Now, it doesn't change the fact that white's probably still better, but it's definitely a much smaller advantage than what he could have had beforehand. Actually, a move like f5 is also interesting, just to try to avoid some f6, f5 by black, just trying to sort of surround the knight. But okay, obviously it is quite a committal move, and moves like bishop f6, rook e8. Black will get his chances as well with the bishop pair and the strong knight on his square. Or at least he will get the bishop pair if white were to take on e4. But instead, white decided to take on e4 at the worst possible moment. And we've kind of seen a couple of cases already, guys, where white took on e4 and it kind of came back to bite him. And unfortunately, bishop e4 is just kind of the worst timing for the move. Because, yeah, on the one hand, you're getting a pawn, but it's not really worth it. Because after the move rook e8, we see that, well, the d4 pawn is really a big weakness at the moment. Also, another problem is that white really has a hard time even keeping the extra pawn. So it's not like you're even able to sort of keep your sort of compensation for, weakening your light squares, giving black a beautiful outpost for the pieces like the knight, and creating this weakness on d4. Because, I mean, if you play, let's say, a move like knight c3, for example, and try to develop normally, black's just going to go f6. My pawn shot a little bit far ahead there, so pawn f6. And if you do retreat the knight, black's just going to play bishop c5 and just, with the discovered attack on a queen, just get the pawn back. And, I mean, the pawn just looks completely, it's a traitor on f5. You'd almost be better without the pawn. But unfortunately, you aren't allowed to take your own piece with queen takes f4 here. Well, the game saw queen d3, and yeah, queen d3. Now, so now found a really great move, knight e6, just hitting that pawn on d4. And now white, if he plays the move bishop e3, black's going to go f6, so we're going to kind of see that once that knight's no longer defending the queen, that black can simply take the pawn, knight c5, and queen c4 doesn't really win a piece because you've got bishop e6, and you're going to be hitting that queen, so you don't get the time to actually take your on pre-knight, as it were. So that would be pretty sad for white. But yeah, the move rook d1 playing a game was actually not really any better, because black found a very nice tactic. Again, let's turn on our thinking caps, and let's get our tactical vision working, guys. So, well done if you came up with the following move, and you realize that the key is captures, 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 and white resigns. Okay, the white resigns part's a joke, but the move queen d4 is very strong by black. Knight d4 also works, but this is more forcing. Because after takes, I mean, if you don't play rook takes d4, black's just going to, collect the harvest, and, it's going to be open season on the white pawns. But after rook d4, bishop c5, what we see here is that even though on material, white's kind of doing all right with the 2 knights for a rook and pawn, which is sort of a close to equality. I mean, if the knights are able to corner, I guess the 2 knights are a little better than the rook and pawn even. The problem is that white just doesn't get that time to coordinate because of the move rook to d8. A very important move. Like, if you don't disrupt white's up and attack his pieces, white's just going to play knight c3 and just probably be fighting for an advantage. But now it's kind of different, because if you get the rook to d1, white's just not going to be able to develop his queen side, and that's actually what happened in the game, where we had knight to f3, move c5, again, very important move. We can't let white to complete his development, unuse his material advantage, so it's more than worth sacking the pawn. Funny enough, white actually didn't even take the pawn. He played bishop e3 for some reason. And after rook d1, we kind of see that white is just completely tied up because of this rook on the back rank, just stopping both the knight and the rook from safely moving. So white can't really use his material, and now with the attack on the knight, that more or less forces the move knight fd2. I mean, at this point, black has a lot of good moves. I mean, I would probably just get the final piece into play with rook d8 and just say that white has nothing here. If bishop c5, you do have moves like rook d2 in the mix to take advantage of that, pin on the knight on b1, for example. But okay, so now I played c4, which, to be fair, is still pretty strong, because objectively the best move for white is probably to go knight c4 and kind of accept that, this knight is a goner anyway. But I mean, after rook b1, you can kind of see that, black is up the exchange. He's going to play b6 to kind of kill the bishop on e3 and sort of free his rook. And slowly but surely, black is going to nurse this to a victory. Well, let's see how the game concluded. The rest is kind of just, sort of putting, lipstick on, I was going to say lipstick on a pig, but actually this is a masterpiece. Well, we had the move a4, bishop to d3, and then we had a5, rook to e8. It's what I'm saying, I don't even care about bishop a7, so I've got rook e2, and the rook comes in the attack. So at h3, h6, white, there's sort of like we're kind of almost like toying with the opponent, just saying to white, your piece is so bad, like you can only move your bishop, pawns, and king, so you're almost in Zugzwang, and I can just play a move like h6, and you've got nothing. You've got nothing, man. Nothing, nothing, nothing. But instead, well, okay, white played the move rook to a4, just saying, well, I'm going to just give up a knight to free the rook. But yeah, bishop b1, rook a1 was played, bishop c2, and the rest was pretty straightforward for the GM. Just a matter of technique, as we GMs like to say. So knight takes c4, because obviously bishop a7, you're running into a rook e2 fork once again. Pretty nasty stuff. So knight c4, rook e4, just continuing to harass white. Knight d6, rook b4, now bring the rook around to attack that weak pawn. Captures on a7, captures on b2. King g3, bishop a4, and you can kind of see just how powerful the opposite colored bishops are for the side of the initiative, because the rook and bishop can really coordinate very well to pile the pressure against that pawn on g2. Yeah, I know you guys, one day I'm going to consult this thesaurus for synonyms on pile up the pressure, but hey, it sounds fun, like who doesn't love piling it on? Well, the game went knight c4, pile on your plate, rook a2, bishop b6, bishop c6, tying up the knight. Now move f5 is saying, I'm just going to fix all your weaknesses in place, tie up your knight even more. King h4 was played, and there is a principle that, trading off the pawns improves your drawing chance when you're losing, but when you're down in exchange, it's a little bit too much. I mean, I guess if you got rid of every single one of these pawns, it's going to be theoretically a draw, but obviously, GM is not going to let that happen. So bishop e4 was played, knight e3. Now the king gets to f7. There aren't any knight forks to worry about just yet. So king g4, rook f2. f5 was played. I mean, black sort of taking his time. Like, I guess he was sort of just playing random moves just to gain an extra 30 seconds increment on the clock, so you can eventually have more than 9 minutes on the clock when you finish the game. But okay, his jokes aside, he had king g3, and then cut the king off with rook to a4. h4, fix the weakness, f5. even though it's a Turkish player playing as black, looks like he mastered the Russian school of chess. And after bishop d8, bishop c6, king h3. And now to move rook f4. White finally lay down his arms, because if the knight moves away, you've got rook takes f5. But if you don't move the knight, there's going to be rook f3. The king will be cut off, and black's just going to do a little dance with the king to, take a pawn here or there, and it's just going to be over. So, yeah, there you are. That's how Sanal managed to win with e4, e5. You now know, guys, how to play the Petrov defense with knight to f6 here, also known as the Russian game. And we've seen it, even though at times had a reputation of being a bit drawish or even a little bit dull, they can lead to very spicy, sharp games. So I think it really is a great opening at all levels of play, once you know what you're doing, which you now do. And to make sure you know what you're doing for other openings, do make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell just to write a subscribe button. That's going to make sure that you get my Grandmaster chess list in your feed, so that every day you can improve your chess that little bit more. Alright guys, good luck in your next games with the Petrov, and I will see you in the next video.